In a speech last night, Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa blasted both those who've been happily capturing a seemingly willing state, as well as the white-dominated economy. He warned that the state is going to sharpen its teeth when it comes to employment equity. But whether sharper teeth against traditional white business will work in addressing South Africa's economic ills is a matter of some debate. And joining us now from Cape Town with his thoughts is Independent Strategy Advisor Shaun Hagedorn. Shaun, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Julieta.
Shaun, you've written a column in which you argue that the political imperative of transformation is becoming ever more difficult to reconcile with global economic dynamics. In light of your comments, what do you make of what the Deputy President had to say last night?
Well, there are constructive aspects, but I would just quickly reference a lot of the difficulties in other resource-based economies, particularly Brazil, Venezuela is particularly a dramatic example, and that the reliance on resource exporting and redistribution is becoming largely non-viable in terms of an economic model which also generates real transformation.
So what kind of economic model should South Africa be addressing? I mean, obviously there is a transformation imperative, and then there's a wealth transfer imperative in South Africa. But are we going about it entirely the wrong way?
Right. I mean, I think we have enough information now to where we could conclude that the approach has been broadly not very effective. If you continually focus on redistribution, and that becomes sort of like a reflex within government at the economic policy making level. So then what happens is it becomes exceedingly difficult to focus on competitiveness and integrating within the global economy in terms of having more and more people focused on value-adding jobs, which are globally competitive, and where there's a focus on exports and generating hard currency income.
So do you think South African policymakers have abandoned or just totally neglected to develop a knowledge-based economy, a services-based economy, in favor of an old industrialized model and then trying to redistribute that?
Right. I mean, I think the thinking is decades out of date. I mean, even in the language of focusing on industrialization. I mean, industrialization can be interpreted quite broadly, but globally, I mean, one sort of reference point is the way it works in the world today. If you look at the forecast for global manufacturing to increase by, say, 2% or maybe 3% a year is pretty much the upper bound, and annual productivity growth in manufacturing is very nearly that high. So there's really very little job creation going on in terms of manufacturing globally. So to think that then South Africa is going to suddenly make all of the policy adjustments, and they would really be massive to be competitive, to take meaningful market share across a number of manufacturing sectors, that's not realistic.
Yeah. Okay, so what is realistic for South Africa? What could we do to try and transform our economy and to make ourselves more globally competitive, to kind of plug ourselves into a competitive global economy?
Well, it's a big question. So just to touch on a couple of things, there's been tremendous success over the past few decades across East Asia. And really, if you just stand back and look at some of the really critical components, there's been a lot of specialization, and then there's been a lot of targeting of distant consumers, wealthy consumers. And that's not the path that South Africa is on. And in fact, South Africa is pretty much the opposite. There's been focusing on value-added goods and services into Africa, where there's growth to a degree, but there's not a tremendous amount of discretionary income across Africa, and it can only grow so quickly. And South Africa's development needs are very large relative to the discretionary spend of Africa. So you'd want to switch the focus to really the wealthier, larger, most demanding markets, mostly in the West, increasingly in Asia, And then also, a lot of it has to do with specialization. It's not where one company invents some new product and then owns the whole process from design to production to distribution all across the world. You need much more integration.
Sean, you're pretty scathing about big business in South Africa too. So you don't restrict your criticism of policy in South Africa to governments. I mean, where do you think South African private sector is failing as far as its development and its ability to create employment is concerned?
Right. So, scathing and failing, it's more of where I'm coming from is the South African business people. They are like business people all around the world in that they respond to their environment. And the environment here is not about being integrated into the global economy. I mean, if you would compare it to East Asia or really across the West. If you look at the composition of exports, obviously a lot of it's extraction-based, and a lot of the value-added goods and services are more targeted to Africa. And obviously there are exceptions, and there are many stunning South African business success stories which are truly exceptional, but they are the exceptions, and that to a large degree reflects public sector policy decisions. But now it's going to be very difficult for South Africa's business leaders to suddenly reinvent themselves and reinvent the broader economy, even if they really are the exceptional ones, given the policy regime that's in place. So it's difficult to imagine how both large groups, government and business, reinvent themselves, and they have to do so in concert, so to speak.
And are you not optimistic that South Africa's young people are going to find the way, that they'll just find it irrespective, because they have to? You're going to have more entrepreneurs in South Africa, that they'll kind of make a plan, as South Africans always have.
Right. And I do buy into that. I think it's very important. And then this is where it gets really interesting. This is the challenge as big business, successful big business leaders work more and more with government, hopefully. And that, oddly enough, you need to look as it works all across the world, to the younger, hungrier, more dynamic, innovative thinkers of youthful people. And that's very challenging. It's not really how the economy is structured, because traditionally South Africa has been isolated, and while there are some great examples of innovation, and there are a lot of people who really do focus on promoting even disruptive innovation relative to the challenges, the economic development challenges, using metrics like unemployment and poverty. There's a lot of work to be done, and we shouldn't kid ourselves, as you can pick up from some comments from business and government leaders, that, if we just do this, if we just do that, the scope of the challenges are quite broad.
Sean, hopefully we speak to you in Joburg when you're up here, which hopefully will be soon. Sean, we have to leave it there, though. Sean Hagedorn is an independent strategy advisor.